Hello again, friends, and welcome to the March 2018 episode of Access City Hall. I'm your host, Stu Levitan. Like all municipalities, the City of Madison spends a lot of time and money to protect our health and safety. We've got police and fire departments, a health department, workers to pick up our garbage and plow our streets. But the city also attends to our welfare, our emotional, physical, even spiritual welfare, by providing places to play and be with nature. That's why they call it recreation, because it is a way to recreate ourselves. When landscape architect and urban planner John Nolan published Madison, a Model City in 1911, he included a series of recommendations he said were, quote, of supreme importance for the future of Madison. Item 12 was to organize the park work of Madison under a new park law. Well, it took a while, but on May 8, 1931, Madison enacted a charter ordinance creating the Board of Parks Commissioners. A few months shy of 87 years later, the board oversees a $25 million operation, a little over half paid for by the general fund, encompassing 5,600 acres of parks and open space with more than 270 parks, 92 tennis courts, 51 soccer fields, 23 volleyball courts, 22 softball diamonds, 22 miles of cross-country trails at 7 separate locations, 21 park shelters, 15 City of Madison landmarks, including 9 Native American effigy mounds, 12 beaches, 12 ice skating rinks, 10 boat launches, 8 off-leash dog parks, 7 B-cycle stations, 4 golf courses, 3 horseshoe and bocce courts, 2 landmark boathouses, and 1 cricket field. There's also the Gates of Heaven Synagogue, Breeze Stevens Field, the Old Brick Botanical Gardens, Wallner Park Community Recreation Center, the Goodman Pool, State Street Mall Capitol Concourse, and when all is said and done, Forest Hill Cemetery. Here to talk about Madison's parks and recreational activities are Parks Superintendent Eric Knepp and the President of the Board of Parks Commissioners, David Wallner. Gentlemen, thanks for coming in again. You may recall that introduction. It was very close to the one I gave the last time you were on. Several of those items have since become controversial, which were not controversial the last time you were on. We didn't know there was a controversy about Forest Hills. We didn't know there was a controversy about golf courses. We didn't know there was going to be a controversy about Breeze Stevens Field. That gives us some of the things we're going to talk about this morning. Let's start with golf. Somebody, and it was not Mark Twain, we think it was probably the novelist Harry Leon Wilson, called golf a good walk spoiled. And all that walking has now led Madison to a crossroads in its golf operations. Simply put, there is excessive supply for the demand, which is great if you're a buyer, not so good if you're a seller. You're in the business of selling the golf experience. Things are a little out of whack with, as I say, oversupply and under demand. Give us a recap of where the situation is now, and then we'll talk about where you think it's likely to go.
Absolutely. So the first thing to recognize when we talk about golf is golf's a very unique component of our large portfolio that you went through. And every time folks say that, Stu, I kind of remember how much we have to do today. So the golf courses, though, the 4 golf courses, 72 holes of golf, that we operate, municipal golf operated by the City of Madison, they're operated in a unique manner in the fact that they're an enterprise fund. We have user fees for many of our services, dog parks, boat launch, renting those park shelters, all those things. Those user fees are a key component of our revenue stream, but golf is unique in the fact that it's an enterprise funding. It's an enterprise fund established by the council. What that means is it's supposed to cover all the cost, operational capital cost of operating those golf holes. It's been that way since at least the mid-'70s, and it had many years of great success. In the '80s, the enterprise fund was a very successful business venture for the city. There was a lot of demand and a lot less supply. Over the last 30 years, that's changed. The number of golf holes available to the public in the Dane County area has doubled since 1990. That, along with a less than doubling in the growth of golfers and avid golfers, has created a real demand pressure on the suppliers, like you indicated. And where we've been in 2012, we as a city changed our operational model. That has improved our financial outlook by operating the entirety of the operation, both maintenance and clubhouse. Before that, we had a contract relationship. That's improved the outlook, but it's definitively not improved it to a level where we can sustain and reinvest in the capital needs of the courses. So last summer, we always give an annual report to our golf subcommittee. Last summer, I took that opportunity to really, I hate to say ring the bell, but ring the bell and the alarm of we've got a problem. And that problem is we are not going to be successful in the current model without reinvestment. And the reinvestment, there's no reason to believe it's available given the current price pressures. You just can't raise prices, right? We're not a monopoly. In fact, there are a number of enterprises in the city. Parking Utility operates an enterprise, Metro is actually an enterprise, but all other enterprises in the city are either subsidized, like Metro Transit, or a monopoly, like Parking Utility with on-street parking, or the water utility. So we have to compete, and in the current market pressures are just too intense to reasonably reinvest in capital. So we issued a report at a staff level to the golf subcommittee, indicating as much throughout a number of ideas. The golf subcommittee, which President Wallner serves on, I'll let him kind of talk about that, has frankly kind of spent 8 months talking about it. We haven't made a lot of progress as moving it forward, but we think in the next 2 to 3 months there'll be a lot more discussion at the Park Commission level about what the future is and how to right-size the golf enterprise to maintain it long-term as a viable recreational activity and not just turn and rely on city subsidy, which we don't believe is forthcoming.
Before we get into what some of those capital needs are and what some of the options are, David, for people who aren't familiar with your past, you were many years on the Common Council as a policymaker. Mm-hmm. What is the policy that makes golf a wholly enterprise system as opposed to some other function? Why are dog parks not an enterprise system? Why are skating rinks not an enterprise system? Why is golf an enterprise system?
It was probably even as Eric said, in those 70s that concept was put forward. I don't know if Paul Soglin was mayor then or somebody else was, but there isn't going to be any change, I don't think. This mayor has been very clear, and I think on the council there are no real advocates for golf. Why it was started, again, I'm not even sure, but it's a bad metaphor maybe, but I think we're between a rock and a bad sand pit, or a bad bunker, because there's no money. And you mentioned capital needs, and Eric did too. And the commission and staff have been talking and meeting for 2 years, literally. We had a retreat almost 2 years ago, this summer, and staff laid out the capital needs that aren't being met by this system. Well, the mayor spoke very forthrightly a couple months ago at the Finance Committee, and we played that tape. Charlie Romines did, our golf person, facilities guy, in front of the golf subcommittee. No new subsidies for golf. It ain't going to happen. He was very clear about it. And as I said, there aren't any advocates on the council who are avid golfers. As the non-golfer on the golf subcommittee, I come to the meetings, especially the last 6-8 months when we've been thrashing through this. Everybody has gray hair like I do. It's an aging group. And you look at the numbers nationally, the consultants report that we got a couple months ago, golf courses are closing all over the country. That Tiger Woods boom that Eric has referred to, and Charlie, the peak in the 90s when everybody was building golf courses, it's going in the opposite direction now. And the number of, it's something like 5 to 1, the difference between golf courses that are closing and new ones in certain suburban areas. And we just don't need 72 holes of golf anymore.
The market is aging itself out of...
Yeah, and it's gonna maybe reach a plateau for a while, but then it's gonna continue, we think. People do golf in the city. There are a lot of golfers compared to other cities. We have a high rate of golf here, but I think the demographics just aren't there. The golf community is aging. And I doubt whether millennials are going to take time out from their busy day when they've got kids to raise and full-time jobs to go out and do an 18 holes of golf. That's probably not going to happen. So the two dilemmas, closing courses and finding the money to make all these repairs, millions of dollars that staff estimates for bunker repairs, irrigation systems, clubhouses, and it's all been put off for years. So, but the golf community doesn't want to hear it. They want to continue most people just say, well, keep my golf course open.
You know, once upon a time, if the President of the United States were an avid golfer, it would make the sport more popular. I don't know if it'll work in Madison. I don't think that dynamic is working anymore. Let's talk the specifics about those capital needs, particularly at Yahara Hills.
Yep. So Yahara Hills was built in '66, started in '66, built mostly with arguably the largest municipal park project done with municipal staff. It was almost all done with city staff.
But there's also federal open space money.
No, federal open space money for certain, and there's restrictions that come with that. And back when there was a law, you talk about federal government. If the president tunes in, he could definitely hear that the return of the law con funding from those days would make America great again. So I strongly encourage him to consider that. But yes, it was built with federal funds. And it was built out at a time when there was very little access for golf. Golf was definitively a growing sport and a sport of acute interest to the growing middle class, but with very limited access. And so we built a 36-hole facility. At the time, the historical record is somewhat hilarious, Stu, in this regard. The paper praised our gargantuan tee boxes, which, if you know anything about golf course maintenance today and the world we live in, sustainability with chemicals but also water use, there is no reason to have gargantuan tee boxes other than we did it. So we built this facility in an area that was historically, it's a lower lying area. It's not a swamp. It's a lower lying area. In the 70s and 80s, when lake levels changed and some of the creeks that serve that area have kind of silted in, it has become wetter. And the real problem is the infrastructure put in, the drainage infrastructure has failed and continued to fail. And so it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy of the course is wet and stays wet. We're confident that course can absolutely function as a municipal golf hub. And frankly, it might be one of the best places to have golf in the city of Madison if you look over a 30 to 50 year horizon. Because golf is a land-intensive sport. Very few people can be on a golf course per acre in comparison to almost any other thing we do. And so we look at that from perspective, and if you look at cities who are doing this and communities around the world, golf courses ought to be, and it's hard to maintain a golf course where the highest and best use of the land, just from a parks perspective, I'm not talking about development, is the more intense uses, soccer fields, shelters, walking paths, dog parks. You can have 20 times as many people per acre at a dog park, maybe 60 times as many. I'm trying to think through this math on my head, on my feet. But it's intensely different. And so we see Yahara as needing reinvestment, and that reinvestment's between $3 to $4 million all in, and that would do the following: new drainage system throughout, new bunkers, and appropriately placed bunkers for today's game, because technology has changed in more than just our phones in the last 50 to 60 years. Players who are my skill level are hitting the ball similar to semi-pro golfers in the 60s as far as distance and drive. And so the bunkers are ill-placed. They need to be updated, along with shrinking those tee boxes for sustainability. And on top of all that, a new irrigation system that's more intelligent and smarter with water use, as well as is functional over the next 30 years. Those are the reinvestments. $3 to $4 million seems like a lot, but it also includes putting in forward tees, making the course more playable, faster play, especially for higher handicap, and for those who aren't golfers, higher handicap means worse. Higher's bad in golf. But a higher handicap golfers, making it more approachable for youth and seniors. That all in is in that $3.5 to $4 million range, which is a lot of money. Other courses, Odana desperately needs a new clubhouse. The clubhouse is a relic from the past. I hesitate to call it. To say it's unsustainable is an understatement. It has plexiglass windows for heating and cooling, which is not what we do in our current standard, especially in Wisconsin. And so we need to update there. That's another $2 million. You add in irrigation and bunker issues at Monona and some updates at Glenway, smaller, much smaller at Glenway. And you quickly add up to between $7 to $8 million of capital needs across the enterprise that we don't have a way right now to generate.
So something's got to give.
Absolutely, yeah. If we don't make a decision and send a policy direction about how we're going to size our golf course operation and fund it, those decisions will be made for us through failing infrastructure and a death spiral of the enterprise, through Yahara becoming, the last year, 2017, we were closed 75 days when it didn't rain because it was wet from the days before. And we lost in booked outings revenue alone, like signed contracts. We lost nearly $200,000 in revenue. That cycle will continue, and we will lose the ability to function as an enterprise.
So all signs seem to point to 18 or 36 holes of Yahara closing.
I don't know if I'd say that, Stu. I think that's an easy button. I would actually argue pretty vehemently that we need to talk about how many holes we should close and where they ought to close. My concern with closing 18 at Yahara is it's an unworkable financial picture. It doesn't really save much on the infrastructure needs, and all it does essentially is limit your revenue potential because 36-hole facility is a marketable facility, and 18-hole facility is just another golf course. And closing 18 doesn't even cut your cost of operating that one discrete course in half. It more like cuts it in a quarter to a third because of all the fixed cost involved. And then closing 36 holes of golf at Yahara, I think, is a pretty surefire way for the city of Madison to get out of the business of golf altogether within a generation. Because I would say that it is very unlikely, given the pressures and the input we've received over the last two park and open space plans, it is very unlikely to me that 30 years from now, Glenway and Monona will be operating municipal golf courses. I think their pressure for them to become something bigger, better, and more widely used as parks is real, and it will come to bear on those locations.
Well, the staff report lists 3 options in order of priority, and the first 2 involve Yahara, closing parts of Yahara, and the third one involves closing Monona. If you tell me that closing Monona is now the highest likelihood of happening,
that was the golf subcommittee's recommendation.
I do want to clarify. The staff report was listed in the order the golf subcommittee told us to list.
That came out of that pro golf group.
Yeah.
And everybody, they're all golfers, and they don't want to close anything, and they want to close Monona. And so the recommendation that was made, I think Warren Anka, your old friend of mine, made the recommendation at about our 4th meeting, and the committee went, yes, bam, 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 voted, and passed it on to the commission and staff. But that's not the answer, I don't think.
We've got about 30 seconds before we take a break. Do you know the answer?
Well, I know for a fact that Eric isn't that good of a golfer.
Okay.
I think he over-exaggerated his ability on the course. I've heard this from reliable sources. I've said for a year and a half that Monona's the option. We should close Monona.
And turn it into a park?
If we need money for all these repairs, and it isn't going to come through the enterprise fund under this mayor or this council, we got to sell some land, and it isn't going to work at Yahara.
Oh man, you're gonna run into a buzzsaw.
Well, I've already heard it from 500 golfers.
You decide you're done with politics.
I've already heard from all these golfers.
We're talking with David Wallner, the soon-to-be deposed president of the Board of Parks Commissioners, and Eric Knepp.
This is my last interview.
This the superintendent of parks. We're going to take a short pause for calls. We'll be back with more. It's Access City Hall on the Madison City Channel. Please stay with us.
Did you know parking over tall, dry grass can spark a wildfire?
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Welcome back to the March 2018 episode of Access City Hall. I'm still Stu, you're still you. We're still talking with Eric Knepp, the superintendent of the Madison Parks Division of the Department of
Works.
Public Works, and David Wallner, the president of the Board of Parks Commissioners. We're going to finish up with our golf conversation, then go into Confederate Rest and Bree Stevens Field, and
Bunch of hot items this
maybe
month.
even it's how parks became so controversial is worth analyzing. Eric, you mentioned some deed restrictions pursuant to the federal funds for the federal open space money on Yahara. Does that set up any restrictions on the future use of? Can you sell it to the Ho-Chunk to expand their facility? Are there things you can and can't do with that property?
Well, Yahara is a very large property. I believe there are 9 parcels that together make the package of 500 acres of land interest that we have out there. About 400 of that's in the golf course now. The majority of the 400 has federal restrictions with it. Most of those federal restrictions, or some of those federal restrictions, are movable, not necessarily easily done, but can be moved. It's similar to DNR stewardship restrictions. There's a process you can go through. Generally not something we like to do, definitely, and it's fairly costly and can be impossible in certain situations. But there is land out there that is definitively held in fee title by the city. The Wild Waters property that was acquired in the 90s with city resources is the city's as a park and could not be if the city so chose. But we haven't really analyzed that process in any real way at Yahara, for the simple fact that Yahara, when you look at it from a city planning perspective, you mentioned earlier John Nolan. He obviously didn't look at that parcel. It wasn't there, and definitely not its configuration. But when you look at a parcel of that size, given its proximity to the interstate, the Beltline, and another major county highway, and its bounded nature, and the long-term 50-year vision of what the city will look like, it makes a lot of sense to me, and I think to a lot of other city planner or urban planner type folks, its highest and best use is really arguably for the long term park and recreation use. So the concept of selling land there is a challenge to my logic, especially if it's for development of anything that would resemble residential or commercial use, because it would be by definition a very isolated location. That said, as well, you mentioned the Ho-Chunk. The Ho-Chunk and parks have worked together over the last few years to build a better relationship and get to know each other better, kind of where we're each going and what we're planning. The Ho-Chunk have never approached me or expressed any interest in acquisition from the city, so I definitely would want to hear from them before I'd ever speculate on their interest or potential partnership in land exchanges.
David, it seemed to me before we took the break that you were, am I correct that you're advocating closing and selling at least part of Monona?
Yeah, Eric has to be a little bit more diplomatic about it because he's got to walk that line more than I do. But I mean, just the options that we have, we're very limited. Selling Monona doesn't take out 18 or 36 holes like at Yahara. It'd be a great infill site for housing, retail. The city doesn't have a lot of places to expand anymore. And the best locations are often like at the Royster site, Union Corners. And you could do a combination, as we've talked informally, a new park for that area, including a dog park, lots of possible amenities that would be used much more than a golf course. And then you, down the road, possibly sell the land and recapture some of that money for these capital needs. Selling you 18 holes of Yahara isn't, to my mind, isn't going to bring in a lot of new money.
So would that, in your mind, do you see those park functions being replacing the current golf course and selling off some of the 90 acres, or that parkland being developed in a different location?
No, well, we're a ways out from getting to that point, and there'd be a long process, RFP process that would involve taking bids, et cetera. But there is a need, as staff has said, for like a dog park in that area. And we could create out of a portion of that 90 acres a very good new large regional park, and that would be used by more than a very specific community of people, golfers. Now all this, when I brought this up before the golf subcommittee or in other places, I realize it's made me sort of persona non grata in that community. We've had several meetings. I'm a minority of one on the golf subcommittee. And selling land for parkland is a difficult sell for some people on the commission and throughout the city probably. But I don't see any other options. It's the best option of anything I can think of.
I'm sure that people from the east side have pointed out to you that out of 4 golf courses, 2 on the east side, 2 on the west side, the only 2 you're talking about closing are the 2 on the east side.
You betcha it does.
I'd love to take the chance here on this on Access with you to kind of point out that I'm a math guy and finance guy by training, and so the first thing is if we're talking about an east-west dichotomy, the first thing you need to look at is how many holes are we talking about? Because I have personally been, and I shouldn't say personally, that makes it sound like I take it personally, and I don't. We have been criticized for the concept of closing 9 at Monona means you're just devastating East Side golf. At the end of that closure, if you close 9 at Monona, you would have 36 on the east side holes and 27 on the west side. You could close 18 at Yahar. Now, operation doesn't make any sense, and you would still be at 27 or 27. So one of the reasons is just there are more holes on the east side. The second reason, there's more competition on the east side, which has led to the competition on the east side. On the west side, our location is premium real estate for a golf course. On the east side, it's less so. From Monona or Yahar, you're minutes away from Door Creek, the Oaks, the Bridges. Yeah. And the west side, your closest competitor is really Pleasant View, and Pleasant View to Odana is a pretty good little haul.
Or Hawks Landing, which is
Hawks Landing, which is
something else entirely.
And that's been in a semi-public access component, similar to U Ridge. You can get on, but with so many events, and it's almost to call it a public. It's not comparable to a public municipal, but absolutely. And then the last piece is the real reason. Those are just logical reasons as well, but the real reason is it's about financial performance of individual courses. That's it. This all stems from financial performance analysis. Odana prints money. It's an unbelievably successful business. Glenway is a profitable business as a percentage basis, fairly nicely, and it hovers around break even if you take a full cost accounting. But the complete truth of that is that includes depreciation, and Glenway just doesn't have a lot of infrastructure needs over the long term. So it's got a pretty good record. Monona is mostly break even, but less than Glenway. And then Yahar is the sucking sound of the Golf Enterprise Fund at this point. Mm-hmm. And so looking at those locations makes a lot of sense. And then finally, I think, Stu, you would appreciate this. With Glenway, of all the deed restrictions, and we deal in this world all the time, and you ask how parks get controversial, well, it's I think because people are so damn passionate about it, and that's a good thing. But Glenway was acquired by the city for Forest Hill Cemetery. And there is our city attorney's office, I'm sure you'd appreciate, it's a legal gymnastics question of whether or not it is the cemetery with a golf course on it, or if it is a golf course that the cemetery might have rights to. It's a challenge, and we do expect over the long term that the cemetery will expand a little bit into that golf course anyway.
Well, that is a perfect segue into our discussion of Confederate Rest. Did
you plan that?
That was really nice. That was good. You could be a talk show host someday, Eric. That's nice. For people who are not familiar with the area, at the far end of Forest Hill Cemetery from Glenway Golf Course is Confederate Rest, which in the last several months has become highly controversial. We had, and here I have to acknowledge to the viewers that in addition to hosting this, I'm the chair of the Madison Landmarks Commission, so maybe between us, Dave and I can make some news on what we're going to do with this. In the last several months, there has been a public controversy thrust upon us of what to do with the 2 so-called lost cause monuments, one the small plaque commemorating the unsung heroes who are buried therein, and the other the large cenotaph grave marker showing the names and paying tribute to Mary Alice Waterman and her beloved boys. This has become controversial because they were installed by the United Daughters of the Confederacy, which was one of the organizations which over the course of the 20th century was active in advancing Jim Crow segregation laws and perpetuating the myth of the lost cause as a noble activity in American history. The mayor, on his own authority, without coming to the Landmarks Commission for a proper certificate of appropriateness, removed the small plaque. The remaining cenotaph is before us. We had a hearing a month or so ago, which also included the Equal Opportunities Commission, to hear from the public on what to do. David, what was your impression of what the people are telling us and what we should do with all this?
Well, eventually this will also come back to landmarks and to parks based on that resolution. My takeaway from that 3-hour-long meeting was that the majority of people felt like leave the dead be, is a short way of putting it. We heard from veterans, from probably 50 people who spoke at that meeting, and before that meeting, I kept thinking, how many people in this city even know those plaques are there? I had never visited the cemetery to look at that site. And the day of the meeting, that tripartite meeting, I went out and walked the grounds and looked at the stone with the names and the tombstones and the whole deal. And so I thought, how many people know those are even there? A very small percentage of people in the city. And so my takeaway from that meeting was that the majority of people we heard from felt like it was much ado about very little. And I appreciate the mayor's sentiments on it, but that's the takeaway I had. I agreed with some of the people who said that maybe we should put another, I think that's worth discussing, putting another plaque there that puts some more context into this history. And there were a lot of people who said that. If it needs to be changed, let's not pull up. I heard, I think, 2 people out of all those speakers who said, let's pull out both of those monuments. So that was my take from it, that the majority of people felt like this was not a huge to-do for the city of Madison. We have other fish to fry, lots of other issues. And, if it needs explaining, put another plaque in there that gets to that issue, those issues.
Do you see any set of circumstances that would result in the small plaque which the mayor took out being returned?
That's a possibility. I'm a former English teacher, and I taught Orwell for years in my classes, and that included Animal Farm in 1984. And when we start rewriting history, and that expression came up at that meeting over and over, changing history because of modern standards that have changed over time, if that plaque is there, are there gross numbers of people in the city who are offended by it? It shows what the history was like. I know that plaque was put in, 81? Yeah. But it shows a sentiment at that time, and the city allowed that to be put in. There was no big to-do about it.
Well, there was no proper process. It just sort of was put in.
Maybe not. I don't even know how it happened.
Yeah.
But
I'll tell you, that plaque is not going back in. The Landmarks Commission is not going to give a certificate of appropriateness to reinstall a plaque that calls Confederate soldiers unsung heroes.
Okay, that's fine with me. I hope the bigger one is not taken out with the names. I think that should definitely stay. I think that'd be overkill, and probably not needed. And I don't think there's a vast, if you poll people in the city, which we won't do, of course, but I don't think most people even think about those.
Personally,
very tiny percent of people.
I think an interpretive sign explaining why there is a Confederate cemetery is appropriate. Mm-hmm. The fact that you can go out there and not understand, wait a minute, what? Mm-hmm. Alabama? What are these guys doing in the ground here? I think that's, right. But once you go from an explanation of why there are dead Confederate soldiers buried in here into the discussion of the controversy of the modern controversy, then we could get into some serious
cities all over America are debating this, obviously. New Orleans in the South, but also in places like New York. I think I referenced
the Columbus Circle.
Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt for his racist views. You got people like Wilson as president. We can go all the way back to Washington and Jefferson as slave owners. And Columbus, are they going to pull out statues, in New York City with all the Italians? So it's happening all over the country. What's appropriate? And to go back and say, I don't like the views that somebody had 200 years ago based on my sensibilities, I'm uncomfortable with that.
Yeah. The thing that I find remarkable about the big cenotaph that was put in 1906 was the number of actual Grand Army of the Republic veterans. I mean, people who actually fought in the Civil War who participated in that ceremony. That to me is striking.
I think even back in 1981, there was a newspaper article we had that there was no controversy about it. I mean, Mayor Skornica, I think was the mayor then, he participated in the ceremony. John Patrick Hunter from the Cap Times wrote one of the articles.
Yeah, well, he's from the South, so you never know about this.
He's also very progressive.
Are you surprised? Were you even aware of that this could be developing? I mean, when the thing in this began in the aftermath of Charlottesville.
Right.
Did it occur to you as Charlottesville was happening that, oh my goodness, we have things in Madison that might generate controversy?
Not until the next morning. No, I mean, our view, we've spent, I mean, the Confederate Rest has been a focal point of policy discussions for the city for the last 5 years. I mean, there was a, we used to allow the flag to be flown, and the Confederate, the CSA flag, the quote unquote real stars and bars, not the battle flag, but we did allow even the battle flag on grave sites for years. Amazingly, prior to 2004, the city staff used to put the Confederate flag on the grave sites each day and take them down. And the ACLU was involved at that point, and by 2004, the policy had changed to where volunteers were still allowed to do that. And so the last few years, we've been focused very much on that because I grew up in enough of the South to know what the battle flag really means. And I'll tell that to anybody, and I'll have that debate happily, generally off camera, because I can tell them how I really feel. Because I grew up in a place where there were no Southern Civil War veterans families, and there were guys in big trucks with the Confederate flag in the back. Some of my cousins still do. I can tell you what it means, and it doesn't mean support for ancestors. And so we've been working on that as just an initiative of kind of common sense of getting the battle flag and getting the flag out. That made little sense. That seemed like a modern day action that kind of reinforces or even does validate that history. But that was where we focused for the last 3 years. We knew those monuments were there. In hindsight, the Unsung Heroes, I had read it before, and it never resonated with me. That's an awareness you have to have as an individual, right, to kind of grow. But no, we didn't notice until the next day when they were vandalized. After Charlottesville, both the monuments were vandalized by Antifa-oriented, or at least signifying Antifa-oriented folks. And that's when we started realizing this is probably going to come home here in Madison. And our goal became to try to protect the Forest Hill Cemetery, the historic cemetery in total. The last thing we need is the cemetery to become a primary grounds for First Amendment expression for anyone.
That's the other thing about the plaque that was taken out. It also includes the battle flag, the Confederate battle flag. So it's like it punches too many buttons to ever go back. We're going to take a short pause for the cause. We're going to resume with our conversation with Parks Superintendent Eric Knepp and the President of the Board of Parks Commissioners, David Wallner. It's the March 2018 episode of Access City Hall on the Madison City Channel. We hope you're here when we come back. Thanks.
See on page 4 that the projections need to be blood. Next Thursday?
Seriously? Thursday? Can't do that.
This is really inconvenient.
I have yoga that day. I have no time for this. So.
I can't do Thursday, but I can do Friday.
Disasters don't plan ahead. You can. Talk to your loved ones about how you're going to be ready in an emergency. Don't wait. Communicate.
We're talking with Parks Superintendent Eric Knepp and the President of the Board of Parks Commissioners, David Wallner. Well, we've gone through cemeteries and golf courses. Let's talk about ball fields, another one of the many city landmarks that are under your control, the Bree Stevens Field, which is now, who knows how this happened, become controversial because you want to put in a concession stand, and our friend Mike Ivey is very upset.
Yes, he is.
Why are you putting it, and again, I have to acknowledge for the viewing audience that is chairman of the Landmarks Commission. I want to step on your jurisdiction. As chairman of the Landmarks Commission, I cast the deciding vote to approve the certificate of appropriateness for this. So why does Big Top Productions want to put in a new concession stand in Bree Stevens Field, and why is this controversial?
Sure, and I would say the Big Top is our contract partner at Breeze, and they have an interest. The city of Madison has an interest in putting in and getting functioning, modernized concession stand or concession area into the facility. And that's just I would say it's the next step in a process started in 2005 and 6. For the history of Bree Stevens, as you know, Stu, but some of the viewers might not. It was built in the 20s and into the 30s in 2 phases. And then it's been used for all kinds of things since then. I mean, midget car racing, the small autos, wrestling, everything. It's amazing.
Teen dances that led into race riots in the 60s.
Yes.
It's been a popular facility.
It's been a very multifaceted facility. But it did fall into a state of disrepair. And that's an unfortunate and real thing that we know. And President Wallner and I have worked together over his tenure and mine to refocus on historic preservation within the system. We've put a significant amount of resources and time into the aforementioned Forestal Cemetery. The receiving vault there, which is our oldest building in Madison Parks, is fully restored with the appropriate type of roofing material, similar to the Caitlin Chapel, right? And even the old depot that is serving as a cemetery office now has been significantly restored on the outside, and we're working on the inside. Gates of Heaven, Garver we probably won't talk about Garver today because it's just moving along, but we have closed on Garver, and there's a private developer working on the full restoration of the facility. So it's been a focus for the city parks for a while. Breeze was actually the one that started that. In 2005, there was determined we needed to reinvest in that facility because we hadn't done so for 50 years. And it was a very limited use. And it became apparent to, I think, everybody at that time, and by the time I started in 2009, readily apparent to me that the way you preserve these public facilities and preserve them well is you give them purpose. And the way to give that facility purpose is to make sure it's modernized with conveniences that make a stadium usable and multifaceted in a way that at that point it had become just a soccer field, only a soccer field, and a very limited amount of soccer. And so in 2007, we started historic preservation. Bachman Construction, Daniels Construction had 2 successive contracts. By 2013, we put in the artificial turf with the purpose of allowing it to be a multifaceted facility, concerts, artistic events. The cultural plan calls for more of those. The park and open space plan calls for theater and like-minded performances like opera in the park and concerts. All that led us here to where we did a facility plan with Big Top as operators, and their expertise of stadium management, led us to, we need a concession stand in that general area of the facility. And putting it underneath in the facility is cost prohibitive and unworkable and probably inaccessible from an ADA perspective. And the argument of putting it at the other end of the facility on the grassy knoll, as I call it, of Bree Stevens, where Pat Richter apparently hit 17 home runs over that flagpole. It grows every time, Stu. Yeah. It's kind of amazing. I want you to research that and get back to me. How many home runs did he hit over the flagpole? I think it's 0. And Pat, if you're out there, tell me if I'm wrong. That would be a heck of a poke, and I love baseball. But it doesn't make sense operationally to put a concession stand as far away from the majority of the customers as you could. It's not modern. It's not common sense. And so we worked very diligently with Isthmus Architecture, who has an acute sensibility around historic landmarks, and that one specifically. Peter Rote and his team have been working on that landmark for 15 years, 13 years. And so we came up with a plan. We appreciate the vote the landmarks gave in supporting it because it's a way to do it reasonably, doesn't negatively impact the facility, and frankly recognizes, and I think this is where Mr. Ivey and I differ, I think he holds out aspirations that baseball has relevance there, and I'm a baseball guy, but baseball has no relevance at Bree Stevens. It's an important part of our history to recognize, but we're never going to do that again. And so the adverse impact there, I think, is minimal. And on balance, preservation through purpose needs it to be modern to give it a long-term rate of success and being preserved as it should be.
David, were you surprised this became controversial?
Well, from what I've attended 3 meetings the last month, including 2. One was the Tenny Lapham Neighborhood Association board meeting, and there was a meeting of 6th District, 2nd District people with the alders there. Eric was at that meeting about a month ago. And so at those meetings, the biggest concern wasn't the concession stand, I think, in the neighborhood. It's concerts, noise, Big Top is proposing bringing in a minor league soccer team, which would play, I think, 18 to 20 games there, in addition to East High, Edgewood, Radicals, Frisbee, the bodegas, the other public events. So the new contract from the neighborhoods, from the 2nd and 6th District, are the other issues. Big Top is asking for more concerts. And there's a letter that just came out yesterday from the president of the Tenny Lapham neighborhood. I don't know if you've seen it yet, Eric, but went through about 10 different points in the contract. It hasn't been finalized yet, but Big Top is asking for some changes, significant changes. And to me, the hub of it, or the nub of it, would be the noise in the concerts. People are very excited about the soccer team, from what I've heard. Parking's an issue. We're going to have a parking ramp there somewhere in the near future on south side of East Wash. But really, it's noise and concerts. And currently, they're doing 7 this year, 6 plus 1 this year. And they've asked for up to 14, and that's going to be a hard sell, I think, for the older in the neighborhood.
See, I think if the initial rendering that was distributed had looked more like it's actually going to look, instead of just that massing study showing black spaceship kind of stuff, it would have been less. People would have been less on edge at the first blush.
I would agree completely, Stu. And we strive to continuously improve, and I can assure you that my staff has a full understanding that we really shouldn't be taking massing studies to a landmarks presentation.
Yeah. We've got a couple minutes left. Let's hopscotch around some other items. Dog parks. You've gone through 1 year of the new expanded dog park, both on and off leash. How'd that work?
Really about what we expected, which is the pilot and the expansion worked exactly like well, Stu, and well in the fact that we gave a new access to responsible, law-abiding dog owners, and they were amazingly responsible and law-abiding. The scoff laws were still the scoff laws. They're still complaining to me when they get tickets for leaving dog poop or letting their dog off leash where they shouldn't and scaring children. Dogs are a very complex issue. Dogs are very important in families. We know we have to modernize our dog parks, and I'm looking forward to the next 5 years, because we're going to build 3 more off-leash areas. We're going to make Madison mostly walkable to an off-leash dog park. And by walkable, I mean mile and a half. Over the next 10 to 20 years, it's a newer amenity, and it's a challenge. It takes space. But we recognize our canine friends' importance, but I also recognize that people really need to pick up their dog stuff and control their dog and put them on a leash when you're walking them in public. That's just common courtesy, because everybody controls their dog really well verbally until they don't.
Well, you may have all this excess land on the east side that you could turn into dog parks.
36 acres a year, that'd be a big dog park.
I was reading your reports over the last couple of months, and it seems that every month you'd be whipsawing between, the weather's great, the weather's terrible, and it seemed to me that you may have, winter's over now for your purposes, and it seems to me that it's over earlier than normal. What has been the effect of climate change on your operations?
Certainly the winter is the hardest season for us weather-wise, for certain. And we have noted over the last 10 to 15 years a decline, a significant, more than beginning end dates do, which actually last year we had ice up and maintained by us later than we normally do. We were into March a little bit. What we have noticed more than anything is the complete, and it's very acutely correct, up and down. Like last year we had ice in March, but we had 45 degrees in January, and we lost it all at that point. We've had no cross-country skiing, but for really good cross-country skiing weather, 1 weekend for 3 years. So it's a concern. Our biggest impact of operations, Stu, is actually in how we're looking at what we plant and how we deal with things related to stormwater and detention. We're actually actively planning for stormwater detention components to reduce flooding. We're in parks and projects we do, we're oversizing certain things we do for detention to try to help take on risks to neighborhoods. And then more than anything is planting and tree planting. We're planting more diverse trees. We're exploring, haven't done it yet, bringing trees in from a zone south of us to prepare for warming, to make sure we don't end up in a world where we have 100,000 street trees all of which are not equipped for our climate.
So you're going to bring in, would that be zone 4 or zone 6 that you're bringing in?
That would be zone 4.
Wow.
What's the newest study I read that we'll have the climate of Missouri
Yep.
So,
within 25 years?
25, 30 years is the most, generally speaking, that's the range. A generation will be 4 to 6 degrees of latitude change.
speaking of trees, that is our segue into the emerald ash borer. I've been writing this history of the 60s, and to see the devastation of the Dutch elm disease is heartbreaking. We're going through that now with the emerald ash borer.
Yes.
What is the status of how much we're going to be hit and how much we can still save?
Gotcha. The first thing is, if you own an ash tree on private property, or you don't know if you own an ash tree on private property, please look into that. Contact a certified arborist to look at your trees, because emerald ash borer is an assassin of trees. Untreated ash, it will kill all of them. Amazingly, Dutch elm, we now plant elm trees, Stu, because right here at the UW and other places across the country, the UW is a leader, led the charge in looking at elms that survive Dutch elm and crossbreeding them and making DED, Dutch elm disease resistant trees. The New Horizon elm is one of 5 varietals that we plant on streets now. Great story for Madison. Right, and I love that. Unfortunately, ash, we don't think that's going to happen because no one has identified an ash tree in nature who has been untreated that survived. It's an assassin. So look for your own trees. And where we're at in the process, we continue our preemptive removal of trees that are diseased or more than 30% canopy loss. We're more than halfway done. We expect to be done by 2021 on the street and 2021, 22 in the parks. We've replanted more than 4,000 trees at this point. We'll end up replanting 13,000 diverse species. And the great news for everybody in the community is we will now have an urban forest when all the replanting is done, where no single species is more than 10% of the forest. So we will stop the cycle of having our most precious and largest amount of trees, which elms were and now ash are, the predominant species being attacked by a pest or attacker or assassin and compromising the integrity of the forest. That's not going to happen again, and that's something we're really proud of.
In 1967, the Parks Commission voted to return to the use of DDT to deal with Dutch elm, and the council, led by Toby Reynolds, said, no, we're not going to do that. But 4 or 5 years after Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, your predecessors wanted to bring back DDT.
Is that right?
Yeah.
We love trees.
We're not talking about that anymore.
We love trees.
You mentioned briefly Garver. Let's give people an update on the status of the development at the Garver feed mill.
So the Baum Group closed with the City of Madison on Lot 1, which is where the actual building sits, and has begun construction. They got fencing up, and they've started some masonry repair work. They expect to close on Lot 2 within 6 months and start the excavation for the micro lodge component of that project. We are going to be working with the neighborhood and alders in the area for Lot 3, which is closest to the creek and the part that maintains. We own all the land, but the part that's maintained in our control. And we're going to be working with the alder and the neighborhood, the alders and the neighborhoods to try to come up with a plan for Lot 3. We anticipate the entirety of that development being done and fully new North Platte, Garver North Platte park and private development that preserves Garver to be done within the next 3 to 3.5 years.
Are you concerned that how close we came to losing that building because of how long it took to come to a decision and get it approved and through the process?
Oh, it was forever, it felt like. And I heard from people around the city that said, well, it's unsalvageable. Just take it down and be done with it and redevelop the park or whatever. So if Baum can pull it off, it looks like they're getting to it. And it's been a slow, long process with staff and working on all the financial details. But I chaired the committee that created that request for proposals. We spent over a year going through various options, and I'm hopeful that financially it'll work. The little houses concept, I was very skeptical about that, and I still am. I'm not sure if that's the market for what they want to do will actually work, but as Eric said, a couple years we'll see what happens.
But from your perspective, is it on a glide path that everything, all discretionary acts and decisions and financing that needed to happen have happened, and now it's just a matter of following through?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are still, the second closing is obviously something where we still haven't closed on the second lot. That's always a concern. But no, I mean, I think it's not been a smooth ride, but it's one that's moving forward, and we continue to progress. And I have no specific cause for concern today that I'd had 6 months ago.
The James Madison Park Master Plan and Shelter Design,
Yep.
or some of us like to refer to the Conklin Park Master Plan and Shelter Design. Status of that?
I went to the first meeting of that group. There was a neighborhood meeting in, I don't know, Eric, were you there? Sarah Lerner was
Yep.
there. Urban Assets is the company that was hired to do the study and the planning. That was about a month ago. They had a second meeting, I think it was last week. Sort of the, what is it called, the hip-hop design?
The architecture.
Hip-hop
Architecture, yeah. And I didn't attend that one, but they've been doing the sticky notes and the ideas, and so I think the study will be done late September, I believe is the last meeting, sometime early or late next year.
Yep.
And whether that shelter will stay there or not, the land behind the old Lincoln School is something that's being discussed, I know. Alder Zellers, who's my alderperson, is leading the charge on that, and so there'll be, I think, 4 meetings scheduled to deal with that park.
Yep.
And they've had 2 already.
I'm going to read something from one of your one of the superintendent's recent reports. A study of mall concourse fees to determine the impact of fully funding services provided by the Parks Division and including services provided by Madison Police Department due to the nature of activities in the area. The study will be done in conjunction with a review of alcohol license fees being conducted by the clerk's office. Sounds like there are a couple of euphemisms in that, the nature of activities in the area. What exactly is that paragraph about?
That paragraph is actually tying.
We got about 30 seconds for that answer.
That paragraph's tying back to the budget language that directed us to work on that study. We've started looking at it. We're going to evaluate our part with the services, but I think that paragraph ties back to alcohol and late night vending, and was the mayor's direction. We are going to be bifurcating and splitting those 2 studies up, and we're going to focus on how much ought the business owners and property owners pay for their services.
Okay. Well, that's about all the time we've got. I don't have time to tell you about the time in 1963 when Wallner Park bathhouse was damaged extensively and a dead dog was stuck in the broken beach house window. So apparently things have gotten at least a little bit better. My thanks to Eric Knepp, the superintendent of parks, and David Wallner, the president of the board of Parks Commissioners. Of course, everyone here at Madison City Channel. On behalf of Access City Hall and Madison City Channel, I'm Stu Levitan. Thanks for watching. We hope to see you back here next time.
Thank you, sir. Always a pleasure.